Hi, welcome back everyone. Today I get to talk about something which has been revelationary to me, and that is going to be sine sync basses. Now, what's the best way to do this? Let's talk about bass waveforms in Psy-Trance specifically. The piece of advice you'll be given most frequently is to use a single saw oscillator, and that's great, and it works. But it's kind of a bit dull. And so what I figured out was a way that I could use a sine wave to get all the same amount of harmonic content, but with a lot more control. And I think quite a few people are using this, but are sort of not telling anyone about it. So here we go. This is how you use sync waves, synced sine waves to make trance bass. Okay, you're going to need a modular synthesizer, I'm afraid, unless you happen to have a synth that will allow you to perform phase modulation and oscillator sync at the same time. Okay, if you have that, then you can use whatever synth you like, but you need to be able to very rapidly perform oscillator sync and phase modulation at the same time. So I'm going to use, surprise, surprise, Reactor, because I always use Reactor. Let's load Reactor up. I swear my computer's getting slower. I've already created a kick drum. There we go, finally. I've already created a kick drum, so let's just check that out now. Just a very, very sort of standard kick drum. What else is there to say? Just check that I'm not getting drowned out by it. Yeah, no, fine. It's just a kick drum. Completely standard. I haven't worked too much on that at all. Straight out the synth, bounce down just to save a little bit of CPU, and that's that. It's a kick drum. So first things first, I start a new ensemble. As I always start a new ensemble, and as always, I'm just going to chuck a load of blocks in there until I get what I want. And this is just like choosing how to shape my sound. It's so quick and easy to do. So into the library I delve. I want to know what MIDI note I'm playing. Obviously. Oscillators. I'm going to need 2 oscillators for this sound. And let's set that up straight away. So the really important thing here is to make sure that I connect these the right way. I'm going to label these 2 up so it's nice and clear to me when I'm working on this front panel what I'm doing. I take the pitch from my note in unit and I put it into the pitch of both units. Surprise, surprise. I take the gate from my note in unit and I assign that to both resets. And now from oscillator 1 outputs, I take the os sync and I put that into the oscillator sync input of oscillator 2. And then on the front panel, I click on both these resets, click the osc and turn the sync and os2 all the way up. So now oscillator 2 has been hard synced by oscillator 1. Let's just put that onto square. I'm never sure whether that actually makes any difference, but it certainly won't do any harm to have a nice clear sync wave. And then I'm going to pick a filter. As I said in my last video, I really enjoy this pull filter for bass sounds. The input from oscillator, the output of oscillator 2 goes straight into the input of the pull filter. Bass sounds aren't very complicated in terms of the actual audio path. You have source, filter, amp. That's kind of it. So there's my modern pull filter. I'm going to take the pitch again and put that into pitch. I'm not going to bother doing any filter FM, that's just going to confuse the issue. And then back into the bento box. I'm going to take a couple of ADSRs, a VCA, which is going to be my main amp. Let's connect all that up. gates go into the envelope gates, obviously, and I'll rename them just so it's nice and clear what I'm working with. And there we go. So now I should have a very, very basic generator which makes sound. Let's get that roughly in the right order. And let's put a, for our own sakes, let's put a scope on our audio out so we can see what's going on. Otherwise it could get very, very confusing. And I'm going to do all sorts of things. I'm going to take the output there, I'm going to sidechain it to the gate, and I'm going to take the actual pitch. So now I have a pretty fully featured scope. There is one other unit I want to use, but we'll get to that in a second. And let's sort of test out whether that's working correctly. So I'm going to put in a bar of MIDI notes, and it's going to be bog standard boring. Well, it's working. Bog standard boring Psy-Trance. 16ths. Dugga dugga. As we're trying to sort of demonstrate something. I don't think we want to get too exotic and bizarre. That's low. Yeah, now's probably a good time to say if you have a monitoring source which it can, at least in some way, produce bass, proper bass, you're probably going to have a bit more fun with this. Well, I've heard worse bass than that, to be fair. Anyhow. Okay, so that's making sounds. Now, the important unit, there's one more unit here I need, and this is the one where it starts getting a bit weird, is I need this mod CFG unit, which is an envelope generator. And it's a slightly more flexible envelope generator than the standard ones. And I'm going to take, and this is where it gets strange, I'm going to take the OS-Sync output of oscillator 1. And I'm going to move that on down, and I'm going to plug it into gate 1. And then I'm going to take out 1 and plug it into the FM input of oscillator 2. Okay, so oscillator 1 is triggering an envelope in this unit here, and the envelope that is being triggered is sent to the FM input of oscillator 2, which is the oscillator we can hear. So let's arrange that so it looks slightly easier. A little bit easier to read. I kind of like that scope down at the bottom, and I want that config underneath the oscillators. It's nice and clear. I'm going to set this up so that's all I want it to do, and I'm going to turn that into a one shot. So it doesn't, if it's not a one shot, if it's this mode, it will sustain, which I don't want it to do. I want it to go straight into this full section. So now it's like an AD envelope. I'm going to whiz the speed up, which means I can get super snappy envelopes, and I can also completely control the shape, which is going to be really, really useful, as you shall see. Okay, on oscillator 2, I can control what sort of FM I want, and I want linear through 0, which is another way of saying phase modulation. Let's smash that up. 100%, thank you very much. Now let's have a listen. And suddenly, we're talking about quite a different sort of wave. So let's turn the volume in that down and solo it. So what you should be able to hear, makes my ears itch. In fact, better than hearing. Let's have a look. What we now have from a sine wave, remember we are outputting a modulated sine wave, is a lot of frequency. loads and loads of frequencies. And from that, we'll go through it slightly. We can generate all kinds of interesting waveforms. So we can use the filter. Did I set that up? Yes, I did. That's connected to pitch. Good, good. And there's all kinds of really interesting waveforms in here. So I can even, if I want to, generate almost a sine wave in its own right, which is I find quite amusing. Not a sine wave, almost a saw wave. So there we go, look at that. And if I control the phase of oscillator 1, I can still control the waveform start position. So I have complete control over the phase still. And you see I can choose how many folds to put into the front of the wave using the curve of the envelope. I can choose the basic pitch of things using the pitch of oscillator 2. So that's got a really massively strong fundamental. I can control how zappy it is using the time of the envelope. But interestingly, that doesn't seem to affect. Well, it does really, but it's all good. And I can control how much of this folding I want to occur by changing the amount of FM that oscillator 2 does. So I can get it quite zappy. And then kind of control it. And no, it's actually getting rid of aliasing. That's why the front is getting quieter. And then it's just a case of just like standard, really. Setting your filter up how you want it. And what's nice is if you listen to this, then I can change the I still have a really strong fundamental bass pitch, but I can really easily control overtones throughout the rest of the sound, which means I can use it to reinforce the bass and work well with the kick. Cool. Now, what if I want to get a little bit more treble in there? Because what you may notice is that that's kind of dropping out. Yeah, I'm not helped by the dodgy filter, I have to say. Ooh, didn't like that. Or whatever. Are we still recording? Good, we are. Not sure what happened there. Then again, maybe I don't need it. Just need to play with the filter tracking a bit. That's probably fine. I don't think I'm going to need a lot more treble than that. And it works. I've got no EQ or anything like that on the kick, and all I have to do is just turn that off, and immediately we're kind of into a progressive Psy-Trance vibe. And what I hope you're seeing is that a lot of these sounds work. It's not just one or two. Yeah, okay. Some of them are going to need some pretty hefty EQ to get working fantastically. But there's so many options in here. And they are right there, sort of at the drop of a hat. And of course, obviously, this can make incredibly powerful leads too. Hundreds of basses. Hundreds of basic bass waveforms. And this doesn't have to be a reactor. You can just as easily do this in a soft tube modular. I've done it in that. In Serum, you could do this using the Icon Has Kick waveform, although it's not quite as powerful. Because it's just not set. I don't think they thought, oh, we're going to do that. It's just sort of something it does do. You don't have to keep it a sine wave. You could switch this to a triangle. And that can also get you some interesting results. Although it's a little bit more difficult to set up. Probably around there. That's pretty techno and nasty. You can even do strange things like controlling the wave shape. With the envelope, that can get you some very nasty sounds. Unsurprisingly. So that gives you just masses and masses of sound. That's all I had to say on that, really. It's a really simple setup. You take your MIDI note in, you feed it into an oscillator, you use that oscillator to control another oscillator through hard sync. You're basically treating an envelope as an LFO, a unipolar LFO, so from 0 to 1, and every time your hard syncing oscillator resets, you re-trigger this envelope, So you could also do this frequency modulation bit with another oscillator, but you won't have quite the amount of control because this has got variable shapes. And then you just chuck it out the synth. If you want to, you can distort it. It works really well with distortion. Let's try that. I just put in some distortion after the filter. Unsurprisingly, it works really well with sine folding.